Good evening and welcome to the 2021 Alphonsus Cassell Lecture Series. This is panel discussion number 2, where we're going to be focusing on the story of us. So over the next hour or so, I will be joined by a number of panelists to discuss this topic. I'll be your moderator for this discussion. My name is Ben Meade, a proud Montserratian living in the diaspora, but heart still firmly on the rock. So a bit about myself. I'm a former journalist, having worked over 20 years in the industry, starting off at ZJB Radio before embracing professional opportunities elsewhere. I've had time to serve as a producer-presenter for the BBC Caribbean Service, as well as a senior producer at the Caribbean Media Corporation. I've also been news director at Observer Radio in Antigua and at Cayman 27 Television in the Cayman Islands. I now work as a public relations and political consultant, and that is a bit about me. Let me introduce the panelists who will be bringing their insight into this discussion. And I mentioned I started my career at Radio Montserrat, and the man who I should give full responsibility for launching me in this direction is none other than the Honorable Claude Bambi Hogan. He's a member of the Montserrat Legislative Assembly. He holds a master's in trade and economic law at the University of London and has done postgraduate work at the International Development Bank and the World Trade Organization. He's also recently passed the England and Wales bar in the UK, so we say congratulations to him. Mr. Hogan has over 30 years professional experience working with DFID, FCO, EU, and the United Nations system. He has worked in a variety of high-profile positions as a CARICOM diplomat, as a project manager, and a university lecturer, among others. As a former Minister of Agriculture, Lands, Housing, and the Environment, Mr. Hogan is an avid gardener and a sports lover. Mr. Hogan, good evening to you.
Thank you, Ben. Wonderful to be with my mentee.
Yes,
proud of you. I'm so proud that you have become more successful than I have, and I've worked across the Caribbean. I only worked as far as South America and a little bit in North America, and now in England. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that, and we'll hear a bit more from the Honorable Hogan in just a bit. Our next panelist is Dr. Tiffany Skerrit, a Montserratian who's currently working as a doctor in Kingston, Jamaica, where she completed studies at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. She has a myriad of interests to include performing arts, volunteerism, public health, culinary arts, and entrepreneurship. In her spare time, she's an active member of the Rotaract Club of Kingston. She enjoys touring Jamaican tourist hotspots with friends and running her cake and pastry company, Dr. T's Sweet Treats. Dr. Skerrit, good evening.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this evening's discussion.
All right, great. And I'll introduce our other panelist at this time, Nia Golden. She's a versatile creative with a multiplicity of skills and interests. Singing publicly since the age of 7, Nia has performed for national ceremonies and annual festivals in Montserrat. Her daring and rich vocals have thrilled audiences at Carifesta in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as in the United Kingdom, where she's working on a musical theater degree. She loves working with children and enjoys creating social media content that entertains as well as educates. Some of the shows she has produced include Discover Lounge, Emerald Vibes TV Season 2, and The Culture Show for the Montserrat Arts Council. Nia is also an entrepreneur and created the luxury concierge brand Discover Picnics, and that was done in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Nia, good evening.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing? Okay, so first of all, I'll ask, before we get into the topic of the story of us and having a discussion, I'll open to anyone and I'll go in reverse order, giving Nia an opportunity. Is there anything that comes to mind when you hear the future story of us and your thoughts about the Montserrat story as it is?
I hope that that Montserrat has found either one or two things that we are good at, whether it's sports or food or music or whatever it is. I hope that we have been able to find our footing in the world, and represent in whatever area it is that we've chosen.
Okay, thanks for that. We will go now to Dr. Tiffany Skerrit. Dr. Skerrit, any thoughts on the story of us? What's Montserrat's story right now?
I think for me, my hope is that we're able to convert or to move our story of resilience past one of restoration and into the future. I'm looking at a story of riches, and that riches speaks not only to the wealth of the country, but the health of the country, in terms of making and maintaining the fact that we're a safe nation, ensuring that we continue to develop culturally. And so we have been for a long time, the island is described as resilient in spirit because of our volcanic background. And that is great. And I think resilience is something that will always be a part of our story. But moving past that into one where we have restored ourselves, whether to form a glory or to surpass that, and looking to build the riches of the country in various aspects.
Thank you very much, Dr. Skerrit. We now go to Claude Bambi Hogan, the Honorable Claude Hogan. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Ben. Well, I'm happy that the younger folks spoke before me. I realize that on this panel, the four of us are probably about 5 to 10 years apart. And I guess it falls to me, having heard the expressions of hope and the expressions of fortitude, resilience, and looking forward to restoration, that I should probably, as the senior one here, put into context why we have these dreams for our future story of Montserrat. We have come out of a proud past, Montserrat has. I often marvel at how much people think that we dwell too much in the past. But in order for us to move forward, we have to look at the past first, where Montserrat was one of the most prosperous islands in the Caribbean. We were exporting country in terms of our agricultural output. We fed Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, and neighboring islands. We were big on trade in that regard, and we built ships in Montserrat, which traveled to as far as Puerto Rico, going back and forth in the commerce of Montserrat. So we created employment in the marine industry, in trade, and in production. We were also at the forefront of music, and we had Arrow, we had Ear Studios, we had Boy George here, Stevie Wonder, the Beatles owner who built that and had his final home here in Montserrat. We had communications lead, we had the communications lead, we had Radio Antilles, and you mentioned Caribbean Media Corporation, where you were, Ben, and we had a TV station on Montserrat. We had cable TV long before the jostling over cable TV came into the rest of the Caribbean. And then we also started our first television production company here called Local Access, which was before Helen Television in St. Lucia. So Montserrat was both in finance, trade, communications, culture, and a center of excellence for communications and all things that are now being modernized. So we are not a backward country, we are a very advanced country. Of course, in that context, we have been thrown back since 1995 by the advent of the Soufriere Hills volcano, which is why we are focusing now on bridging our past of excellence, going towards restoration, building on the resilience that we have shown in spite of the volcano and the many hurricanes and floods that we've been through. And after building that, we want to see, I think, in the future, which is the next part of our discussion, what will Montserrat be restored to?
And I'll say thanks for that. I will also point out to you, Mr. Hogan, Radio Antilles, the voice of the entire Caribbean at one point, was based in Montserrat. We had another station that's audience was not just Montserrat, where we had Gem Radio, in addition to our great local broadcasting. I would also like at this moment to introduce another panelist who's just joining us on this Arrow lecture. as we look at the future story of us. Jaish Sadwani is a young entrepreneur in Montserrat. He's currently in his final year at the Kingston University of London, where he's studying management with marketing and finance. He's the founder of the Chess Empire, which provides a portfolio of products and services ranging from event promotion to a clothing line to real estate, and also home networks and CCTV installations. He also works in the family business, Ashok Supermarket, and when he's not at the supermarket or in class or doing some other work, he enjoys songwriting, performing his music, or playing chess. Jaish admires how Arrow placed Montserrat on the map, and in the near future, he hopes to further that initiative for the well-being of the youth on the island, whether it be through entrepreneurship, networking, or through music. So Jaish, we welcome you to this discussion. And as I've given the others, just an opportunity to say for yourself what you think of when you hear the story of Montserrat, the story of us, before we even start talking about the future story of us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, first of all. When I think about Montserrat in the future, I must say, firstly, I was born in the 2000s, so I was not there when Montserrat was, as the older generation says, was Montserrat. So I'm pretty much, I would say, not uneducated because I've heard a lot, but my vision of what I see Montserrat as the future is somewhere where, as they say, as they said that it was in the past where a person can come, be relaxed. So there's a saying here that there's no celebrity in Montserrat, and I'd like this place to be somewhere anyone can come and relax, views, like just be who they want to be without having any kind of, I would say, pressure. Somewhere where rich in culture. So I think personally that, we're losing that value because I don't think the youth now know how to do things that the older generation knows. So, for example, playing masquerade drums, most musical instruments. For example, I myself don't know how to play a musical instrument. I try to fix it by doing a bit of songwriting and poetry. However, I feel like the cultural value is slowly losing, and I could see that when we see a lot of our youth just migrating to different places, and I find that to be a very difficult pill to swallow because we're going to be not just losing a brain drain, but just losing ourselves to now I would say losing ourselves to the diaspora, but like you find that Montserrat is a very diverse place in terms of culture, and I feel like if we don't pass it on to the youth, slowly we'll be losing ourselves to, someone else's culture, or not. Don't want to say it like that, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from.
I get exactly where you're coming from.
Demographics of the island right now. So that's my fear. How we can fix it, as I'll say, more youth development programs, culturally focusing them, showing persons that there is a whole career in this. You can make a living out of these cultures, and I think we should do better marketing here. So, for example, for our local artists, for our local musicians, just giving bands, performers, just creatives on a whole, some more opportunities. And I feel like that would not only encourage them, but also give them the opportunity to develop themselves and also show them the bigger picture, that how successful you can be as a creative, and not just push the narrative that, it's go through school, study maths and English, become a doctor or lawyer. I feel like we should be more proud of our culture and not just said that it's a thing of the past, because it's not. It evolves. I must agree, culture does evolve, but we need to pass it on a bit more.
Okay, and that's, you mentioned quite a bit there, and we're going to get into all of that. And Mr. Hogan mentioned something, and I think I'm the only one on the panel who could relate to post-volcano Montserrat or pre-volcano Montserrat, knowing when there were multiple airlines flying to multiple destinations to Montserrat, when there was industry, when we exported. For a brief while in the early 90s, we had the rice mills project. We had W&W electronics, exporting computer components, and other things as well that Mr. Hogan mentioned. But to the other three of you, when we say, let's get Montserrat back to being Montserrat, how do your ears receive that message? What does that message send to you, and what does it mean? Tiffany?
Yes, I think for me that message means we want to restore, which means we spoke about in terms of things that were selling points, our agricultural industry, our trade industry. It means that looking back, you see where we were doing so well in these areas, and now this gap exists where we consume more than we produce. And I think looking into the future and looking into the story of what we want Montserrat to be, we should be a self-sufficient country. We should be a country that wants to produce in excess for itself and for others. And so I think that is a good trait. So, looking into specifically the agricultural industry, what does that look like? What would it take for us to be self-sufficient? And self-sufficient doesn't necessarily mean in all aspects, in terms of all areas of agriculture, whether it is livestock and crops. It could be in some areas. And as Nia was saying, looking at particular industries where we did well and focusing maybe on those. When we speak about Montserrat being Montserrat, or trying to have Montserrat return to its former glory, it also speaks to culture. And Jaish should have spoken about that. What does it look like? What would an Air Studios of 2030 look like in Montserrat? And it probably doesn't look the same. It probably doesn't involve, it may or may not involve foreign artists coming to record there. It may involve us having a local group of artists launching the studio, right? It may look like these local artists inviting other regional artists to record and do shows in Montserrat. And so it may not look exactly the same. It may not be international artists. It may start with our local artists and then bloom into our more regional artists. But I think that's a good start. And so I think when we speak about Montserrat being, trying to get back there, it's really about restoration. We want to restore ourselves to what we were before. And at least if we can do that, then there can be a launching pad forward. I think that's where we're currently, kind of stuck.
Okay, that sounds very positive. I like the insight you provided. Nia Golden, any thoughts from you when you hear the older people speak of Montserrat of the past before the volcano? What does that message send to you? How do you receive that as an up-and-coming young Montserratian?
Okay, so I believe that we had a lot of people who were knowledgeable. I believe that we had a lot of people who were owning the businesses that were producing all the products that you guys have been mentioning. And for me, what bothers me, I feel like, is that there's a disconnect between what it is that we want and what it is that we are doing. So in terms of school and, like, let's say MSS, for example, the fact that there isn't even streams with the industries that we even currently have, I think, is the issue. You have example now, we have the Bank of Montserrat. We don't have RBC there. We have a foreigner who is the manager. I'm sure we would love to have a local, I think, a connection between the bank and the school. So like students who got 1 in accounts or 2 in accounts, they should be knocking on your door and say, congratulations on your results. Here's an intern program that you can start if you're looking to do it. I think that just to even, like, I know the stuff that we want to do and, like, we have these big dreams, but we have stuff that's right there that we can become very skillful at. I think there's just like a disconnect between the two things. So I would love it if people would recognize how important it is to make sure that there are proper structures in place from the time the child, whether they're born or from the time they're in primary school or secondary school, so that it's all connected. Because the issue is that you leave, and then if you go overseas, you realize how much you actually don't know or how much experience you don't have, because there wasn't anything that was sort of laid out. The experience that I have been able to have has greatly been because of my mom and because of the experience that she has and the fact that she has pushed my siblings and I to think bigger and to take advantage of what Montserrat has to offer. And I'm totally grateful for her for that, because it means that I'm a bit more ambitious, and it means that I'm also very disciplined about my craft and what it is that I want to do.
You raised a very interesting point about being exposed to the world. I found when I had to, against my will, I will point out, I'm old enough, my parents can't beat me, was sent back to Canada to finish high school due to the volcanic situation. My core subjects, I was way ahead of the curve compared to my new classmates. However, but in terms of preparing me for the world of work and other disciplines, they were miles ahead of me. I was entering into a class of people preparing to graduate high school who were in their second year of studying Canadian law. So if they had an interest in law, they would have been able to pick that up from high school and not wait until a law 101 at university or some other interest. So I just wanted to validate your point there. Jaish, when you hear us speak of let's return Montserrat to what Montserrat was before the volcano, you young people don't know what Montserrat is. Let's show you what Montserrat really is. Are we really hanging on to the wrong thing? Is that an anchor holding us back from looking at a new Montserrat rather than trying to pull us back?
Definitely. Although I agree with what Tiffany said, I think that what's more important than restoration is actually the retention at the moment. Because what we're having right now is very scary, first of all. And in order to retain the youth, to retain the population, that's more important than restoring what we once had. So if you look at it as a economic, from an economic view, what you would see is that you're losing a lot of young people. So you have an aging population, and how do you fix it? Now, if you look at what young people are interested in, you see persons like Tiffany, you see persons like Georgette, Samisha, I'm calling names, forgive me if I don't, I have my friend Stavika, that they're going into this medical field. So now you see persons are interested in that. You have a hospital. In other places in the Caribbean, you have places like Martinique, St. Martin, that have hospitals with helipads that fly in people, and we all know how hefty a hospital bill can be. So this is where you can bring in some revenue into the country. You can encourage youth to go into this sector. That's one, it's very recognized. So as a doctor, you are recognized. It's very well paid. It's a respected profession. Then you have, let's say, a lot of young persons here, males, females, that are interested in drag racing, that are interested in mechanics, that are interested in automobiles. So you push that, you give them something that they would be interested in, that would not only encourage them to stay, but at least give them an incentive while they're at it. So it is a field that you can make a lot of money out of, and they will stay here, and that money would circulate within our own economy. Another problem that we have here in Montserrat at the moment is that a lot of the profit that's being generated in our economy are leaving our shores. And it's been happening for the past, I would say, decade. Now, when Tiffany mentioned, I think, no, Nia mentioned the Bank of Montserrat, when they release their reports at the end of the year, you can see that they're making millions, I think $4 million, $3 million. We need to see that money being reinvested into the country to better us, not just, as a report like, hey, we're doing this, we're looking nice. Some of that money needs to go back into I would say, the youth. That's my main focus. As I said in my introduction as well, I'm all for youth development, and I feel like without that, we will lose ourselves. So before we restore, we definitely have to retain our population, retain what we have at the moment. So you could look at it as an hourglass. Everything, I see things are going down. So we need to turn it around. So at least for now, both sides are steady before we could turn it upside down and make it what it once was in terms of Montserrat. Another field you can look into is, I mentioned the hospital, I mentioned the drag racing. I also mentioned a lot of young entrepreneurs, a lot of budding young entrepreneurs are coming out. You can see the Department of Youth Affairs. They've been posting it weekly, where a lot of young entrepreneurs are coming out, and there's a lot of grants that are being given out. So just push that initiative, continue to educate them, give them more insight as to just being an entrepreneur is not just opening an Instagram page, but it's also getting the legal side of it. So, for example, the bank accounts, the financial commission forms, filling out that kind of stuff, registering your business with the registrar. That kind of information should be released into the youth or into the media, so they're educated. This should
Okay.
also be in our education system and going forward.
Okay, good points raised there. I want to bring Mr. Hogan back in. Having heard some of these comments by our young professionals and having had the opportunity on multiple occasions to sit on the government side of the aisle, do you get a sense that we do not quite appreciate what it takes to turn around and rebuild a country to a level that it was prior to setting it on a pathway towards greater success? Or have we just been making the wrong steps along the way?
Steps in Montserrat. There have been survival steps, which may be seen to be wrong steps. But everywhere along the way, the people of Montserrat, those who have remained and those who have joined and those who continue to join, have been focusing on the same agenda. All of the world is the same, in my estimation, in terms of building village communities. I understand some of the frustrations, and because this is an hour lecture, I'm going to ground my response in two songs that Arrow produced. One was called Gene Under the Bed, which was a reflection of the troubles that immigrants in those days who migrated for work had, living in the Virgin Islands and had to hide from immigration. But they did whatever they had to do to raise funds because they wanted to come home looking fit and trim and well endowed and able to build their own homes and settle down. And some even just to educate themselves. If you look at Gene Under the Bed phenomenon, that is no longer an existing issue for Montserratians. We are British citizens, and even if we weren't, it is now easier around the world with free movement of people once you have the correct skills, or if you're in pursuit of skills, to find success anywhere in the world. We shouldn't restrict ourselves to the 39.5 square miles of Montserrat. So Gene Under the Bed should inform us of the fact that we need to, as they say, roll a bit and get experience under your belt. Now, the second song that Arrow did was Hold On to Your Property and Read It for Your Children. And this is still very important. This has happened for Montserratians. We still own Montserrat, although we don't behave as if we do. And this is the part of the problem. Part of the problem is I think there's a dissonance between holding on to the property now and willing it to our children as what? And our children are more interested now, not just in ownership of land, as Jaish has pointed out. They're interested in converting or using property and land as business opportunities. So Montserrat is actually thinking first world in the 21st century as in any other country. So why do we have these frustrations? I think we underestimate the economic trauma that followed the advent of the volcano. And I think we underestimate the very difficult task of turning that around. And what we have a deficit of is looking at the political system that will help us to mobilize to move where we want to go. I see the young people are trying, but they're trying using political systems. And there was a book in Montserrat called Crucible. And they're trying to use systems that are not responding to their more capitalist or commercial or investment style of movement in Montserrat. So we need to look at that. And we need to, as Tiffany pointed out, revisit some of the things that we have invented, conquered, made great, or made us great, or part of our glory, and see how we can do them better. Everybody wants to move on into areas which are unexplored, explored, and also which they have not studied whether this is going to yield any benefits for them in the long term, because it looks glamorous. So there's a sense of a loss of focus because of the economic trauma post volcano. And I think that we are now gathering ourselves. It has taken us long, and we have to be careful that we do not lose the cultural connectivity that once was, and we do not lose sight of what is possible when we look at the future and we're just doing things for which we are not structured. So we have to look at our structure, and I hear a lot of talking, a lot of business registration. I even see advertisement for starting innovations. But have we looked at, for example, if we do all this innovation, some of the things that our government is doing, are we going to then, what you call it, outsource them to these young people so that they can create a private sector in Montserrat that do a lot of these things and therefore can foster more livelihoods? So this is the structure we need, although we have the thinking. I hope that helps.
Yeah, you raised a few interesting points, and you mentioned the private sector. We always know the private sector is supposed to be the engine, but in Montserrat, government is actually the engine for the economy. A question, and I'm going to open this to the panel, so anybody can raise their hand and jump in, because some of you, or not all of you, would have existed knowing of the volcano, hearing complaints about the impact of the volcano. From the younger ones on this panel, when does the statute of limitations expire on saying, okay, we're rebuilding from the volcano and focusing on what put us in this position, rather than saying, you know what, let's chart a new way forward. Let's move forward as though there's nothing that can stop us. All right, Nia, you can jump in.
It's now. Like we should stop saying it now. I think. Yes, we should definitely stop saying it now, because words have power, and if everybody is cycling and saying the same thing, then you really start to believe it for yourself, and then you don't actually go forward. And I understand and I empathize, and I know how well, not I know, but I understand how traumatic the time was. But the other thing is that, like Jaish said, we're born into 2000s. I was born in 2000. I don't have the memory of that. I don't have the trauma of that. I don't have the pain of that. And what I think the older generation should look at us and recognize that we don't actually have to deal with the psychological, blocks that would stop us from trying things out and testing things out and going out there and expressing ourselves and all this kind of stuff. We don't have that. So for me, I would be looking at the young people to be like, okay, what do you need so you can go? Because I'm too afraid to do it. And I think that it is okay. I think it is very okay if the older generation says, I can't do it. Because that's the whole reason that we exist. You pushed us out, you raised us, Montserrat is a very perfect place to raise children. It's safe and it's loving and it's kind, and the fact that it's a little bit amount of people, the advantages that I've had in the music because of the late Sir George Martin providing those music teachers. I have soaked up every living thing that I can. And now that I'm overseas, I am on par with the other musicians and stuff that I have met because of those advantages. So for me, the limit, it's up now. And we should be looking at the young people and say, okay, what do you need to do X, Y, and Z? Because, pass on the mantle. Like, it's always now. Pass the button. Let's go. Let's run with it.
Okay, Dr. Skerrit, you've been smiling and nodding along. Let me hear from you on this.
I loved what she said in terms of us being ready, young people being eager to receive that baton. I think, looking back at what Mr. Hogan said and thinking in terms of the structures that exist, some of the things that I think are holding us back aren't necessarily political. And so, yes, the structure, maybe the political structures with which we exist now need some modification. But I think a lot of the things that we're interested in, or a lot of the avenues in which we're interested in pushing the island forward, are not limited by politics, are not necessarily limited by structure. And I agree with Mia in saying that part of it is mindset. Part of it, I think, now in this critical transition is us, a meeting of the minds, to put it like that, which means that we sit down with our elders and we say, you are coming from a stage where you've seen this island prosper. You've seen the island in a stage where we were a bit more independent than we are now. And we are growing in an island where we've only seen that quote unquote dependence. What does it mean, or what does it look like? And I think that's part of what we want to talk about this evening. What is it that it would take for us to get to an island that is wealthier? Be an island in 2030 that is healthy, that is safer, that is more culturally aware, that is marketing itself. Part of some of those are political, some of them are, as I think, going to be driven by the private sector, which means that in terms of the cultural, it means that there needs to be programs. And we spoke about youth programs, Jaish was speaking about youth programs. It means a lot more partnership between the schools that exist and groups, community groups. And these community groups would have returning Monserratians like Mia, like Jaish, like myself, who have had the benefit of a bit of exposure, who love the island, who want to see it develop in this particular way, and can say, okay, this is what I've seen in Jamaica that works well. This is a framework that I think we can introduce. This is how we can partner with schools, with students in schools to ensure that everybody above the age of 7 has at least learned to dance the four dances for masquerade, who by the time they get to high school have woven a basket. So certain cultural things where we teach national anthems. These are things that are in schools, but have to be supported at home, have to be supported in our communities, have to be supported in a large way, I think, by churches as well. Because if you look at our island, these are the institutions that have some sway. These are the institutions that have large enough memberships that can make an impact. And so, yes, I agree that we do have some political reform that is necessary to drive us into the Montserrat of 2030. But a lot of the things, I think, will require a meeting of the minds and a combination of that hope that Mia speaks about and that history that Mr. Hogan speaks about, because we need the experience. We need the Nerissa Goldens who have seen both sides. We need the Ben Meades who have seen both sides and can say, okay, I've gone to this place, I've had this experience. Looking at the Montserrat context, it may not work exactly like this, but these are the ways, or these are the things that we can apply specifically to the island that would make us better.
Okay, Jaish, I'm going to bring you in here and I'm going to try to steer the discussion going forward, and you can bounce back on some of that. But with your entrepreneurial mindset, how do we shift from looking at a bricks and mortar concept where 90% of your customers are going to be local to leveraging technology to ensure that the world is our customer base?
Well, to be honest, as Tiffany just said everything better than I could ever say it. And to continue what she said, I totally agree with her. We do need the experience. Montserrat cannot be to the best that it has ever been without that experience from the Claude Hogans, from the Ben Meades, from the Nerissa Goldens. We need that experience. But what we also need to do is look and see what other countries have been doing, what is working for them. Now, our situation might be different politically, with our British territory and so forth. But when you look at that, the world has changed completely. It's the 21st century. There's no longer a boundary. There's no longer a limit. I can make a call right here. I can make a purchase in New York City. There's no limits anymore. And what would drive that change is just the education. You need to expose the youth, the older generation, to show them that it's not just someone from your customers are not just from Lookout to Salem anymore. They could be anywhere in the world, and that's one of my goals that I have for chess, is to be more global. And I think if I make that step, it would encourage more persons to realize that, the world is your market now. Everything can be online, credit cards, data, phone numbers, it shows you. And what I really wanted, like there's so much opportunity, cryptocurrencies. There's so many different ways, different avenues that you could tap into that could make you a lot of money. But going back to what Tiffany said, with the experience that the older generation had and with the drive that the young people have, as she wonderfully said, that the meeting of the minds is very important. Now, I might be enthusiastic about a certain industry and it may not work well for Montserrat, but I need someone to explain that to me and tell me why, tell me what would work instead, and so forth. So when you look at, for example, agriculture in Montserrat, they've been pushing it. I've been feeling it, and I think this would work well in order to be self-sustainable for right now. But what happens when we reach to the point where agriculture, we are now sustainable? What are we going to do now? So then you have markets within IT. You have the car industry. St. James runway in Nevis makes a lot of money for them annually. When you look at Antigua's Raceway, it makes a lot of money for them. Martinique's hospital in the Caribbean, where you could not only bring in Montserrat's patients, you could bring in patients from other British territories. So you have Anguilla and so forth. That we have, we've been known to be one of the more educated people in the Caribbean. Our island is like in the perfect geographical place, right between Leeward Islands. We could go quickly to the northern side of the Caribbean and quickly down south. So I feel like we just, in order to make the world a market, first of all, is education and it's just giving opportunities. So giving the opportunity of someone who is probably in another country, who knows what's happening, and just giving the opportunity to liaise with more young people in Montserrat, showing them everyone needs a mentor, basically. And without that bridge between the older generation and the younger generation, there's always going to be a problem. And I feel like to avoid that problem, we need to have more connection, as Nia said. And to finish it off, I would like to say that we who haven't experienced Montserrat pre-volcano, we don't have that trauma to deal with. And it may be an advantage, it may be a disadvantage, but I would say creating wealth and holding it is no longer valuable. You have to invest that. So what Mr. Hogan said about passing on that house to your child as a, I would say, in a will, I don't think it holds the same value as it did before. Now you have to invest to create that wealth. You have to put your money into something that will generate more money for you, for your country, for your kids, for everyone. And without having that like done as a mass, one person won't change it. We have to do it together. So holding on to that money, putting it in Bank of Montserrat, it's not going to do it. We have to invest that cash and we have to do it in ways that could generate wealth for everyone, not just for, you know,
An
one.
interesting point you mentioned there, Jaish, as you ended. I was speaking just a couple months back with a former classmate of mine who's working with a major international company and said, Ben, you know, one of the biggest fallacies that we've been taught growing up is make as much money and put it in the bank. And said, Ben, that doesn't make sense because your money isn't doing anything. The bank is making money off of you. We need to teach our children the benefit and the value of investing and how investments can not only create wealth, but create other opportunities. Against the backdrop of some of these comments, Mr. Hogan, what do you see as we enter the latter part of this discussion, as we look towards a Montserrat of the future, our story? Hearing Nia speak about maybe we have a new Air Studios, but with Montserrat talent, and somebody may be listening and saying, that's far-fetched. Nobody's listening to a Montserrat artist. There was no Arrow before there was Arrow, right? I'd like to point that out. You have to start someplace. Claude Hogan, any thoughts on the role of persons like yourself in helping create a new Montserrat, a progressive Montserrat, where the youth is saying, give me the baton, let's run with it. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know that they can take the baton yet, but I believe you can have. You see, this is one of the. I speak very straight because I'm 50 now, and this is one of the problems that we have is in transitioning our young people. And I like how our young people sound. I like the enthusiasm, and I know they can be conquerors. But my point on holding on to your property and building it for your children has to do with working with the children as well as to what their likely future will be when they start to invest their property as Jaish wishes. And of course, this is what growth and development is about. I also spoke about that you need different structures in Montserrat if you're going to want to integrate and invest in the world as other people are doing. We obviously are a little behind in our political systems. We also need a lot of legislation, and we need to catch up, because I think we have some great ideas about working with, say, the rest of CARICOM. And very few people realize how very hard we've been holding on to the politics of being a British territory and refusing to integrate and participate, for example, in the CARICOM single market and economy. And we want to hurdle our Caribbean space and get into the European space. And we have done that perhaps in our history a couple of times with W&W, and as you said, Ben, with the rice mills. But the reason why I feel that the senior citizens have to do some hand-holding, young guys, and not just give you the baton, is for these very reasons about transitioning. And I have to go back to the old point, that the reason why you all have not felt the transition from a generation of home ownership and residential tourism to one where we have all of these other ways of investing across the world. The reason why you all have not felt it is because everybody was involved in post-volcano rebuilding, including yourselves and your education. That's why you all are so brilliant. Now you have to exercise some patience and work with your senior citizens to transition into the world. As a matter of fact, I hear you guys talking about things like cryptocurrency. I'm still reading up on that. And I don't think my father will tell me to go invest in cryptocurrency until I could convince him that his money that he gave me is safe. So this is the kind of hand-holding that we're talking about. And it goes back to the original point raised by Nair. We have to research and look into our past and see our powers and find the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 10 things that we think we're going to be good at. We have to find and create opportunities for innovation from where we were to where we want to be and commercialize those. I know a young gentleman, a Montserratian called Noel Gray, who once wrote, "Small has its advantages." And what he meant by that is not just about Montserrat being a small physical space, that you can do small things as well, because we added an economic definition to it. You can do small things that have big impact. A doctor is not a small, from a small island, can have a global impact. A company in Montserrat producing from agriculture, because we should never worry about reaching sustainability. Because when you tell your grandfather, if you grew up on a farm, or your grandmother, that we reach sustainability in agriculture and that's it, we want to go and do something new, he'll have a problem with that. So we have to then think about, Granddad, I think the new area in agriculture is not exporting tanyas and bananas and raw food. I think we have to think about packaging our food, right? And go to value added, a whole new level. And don't just think about hurdling the Caribbean. Think about reaching your friends, your relatives in the Caribbean, and also think about reaching them now in Europe, North America, wherever, and build your market. You know who's doing that very well? If you want to learn about it, the Jamaicans. Everywhere you go in the world, North America, South America, Europe, England, there's some Jamaican line of opening up. They even have a taxi line in the world. We have to think about now Montserrat, not just about exporting a product to, say, even England, we have to think about now, what is the value added product we have from Montserrat for the world? And this is why we have to not just think that all of these small businesses that we start up, which are looking glorious, are going to be successful unless we have joined up thinking between the seniors, the new people who have the ambition, and we have to set them loose, yes, but we have to set them loose on what we have cultivated as our new or what do you call it, entry into the global market. And I think we're going to be successful, but let's not jump off and not go into it as a family and think about the survival of our seniors, your prosperity, and the future of your children as well. And that's what I mean when you say, hold on to your property and will it for your children. It's not about physical property anymore. It's about holding on to whatever we have and we have owned and earned in investment or otherwise, and keep letting that multiply and make richer and better Montserratians and a better Montserrat. And that's the new way of thinking. And I agree with that. But don't think about just that you guys are going to get away from all that we have been and not do some hand holding.
I don't think they're pushing you into your wheelchairs yet. I don't think I don't think the message they're giving is that they're ready to push you into your wheelchair as yet. We just have a few minutes left, and if I could just inject one thing I have to say. So we always talk about it's a brain drain. All these young people are leaving Montserrat, and we have to stop it. And I personally think that's a fallacy because the world is our oyster. Yes, we do need to retain some people, but do you think small towns in the US, for example, where it's the norm, the majority of high school graduates head off to the colleges and universities in cities and only return home for Thanksgiving and the holidays? They're not saying we need all these people in a small town. What they're saying is some will stay and others will go out into the world and bring back benefits to their home areas. And I think in Montserrat, we're poised to do that. We're sending so many talented people in different parts of the world. I think what we need to do is leverage the talents that we have exported to help create this new Montserrat, to build this vision that we want to see. And I'm going to do a different style of wrapping up. And I'm going to put each of you on the spot. And I think I'm going to start with Nia. The topic of this Alphonsus Aro Cassell lecture for 2021 is the future story of us. If I gave you all the power right now, give me an elevator pitch of it's all up to you. 10, 15, 20 years. What's the future story of Montserrat looking and sounding like? You've got a minute.
Okay. Okay, as an artist, as a musical artist, I would say that Montserrat is producing artists in R&B, pop, jazz, country, reggae, soca. We are a place that you stop to watch theater performances. We are the country that you come to shoot movies. Yeah, from the artistic stance, that's where I would see Montserrat right now, since I have a minute.
Okay, I appreciate that you focused it on your particular area of specialty. It would be weird to see you go off in left field. Let's go to Jaish. Give me your elevator pitch of what Montserrat would look like 10, 15, 20 years if you held the magic wand to make it happen.
If I would look at it from an economic standpoint, I would definitely put our health first. So a very good hospital that could not only take care of us, but also have space for persons in the region. I'm also looking at a very good port where we can access containers directly from major cities in the world, and we don't have to depend on smaller boats from coming in from St. Martin and islands in the Caribbean. I am also looking at a very sustainable agriculture sector where we are self-sustainable and we're also providing like how we used to before. And I'm looking at a very strong education system, both academically and culturally, where our students, our children are not only learning maths and English, but are also learning instruments, also learning different skills that could be very useful to them in the future, making them well-rounded individuals. I'm also looking at a very strong support system from the government in terms of sports. We have a lot of talent down here, whether it be basketball, football, cricket. I'm looking at a lot of support where we're pushing at least 2 or 3 cricketers into the Leeward Islands. We're pushing a stronger national team with more locals that actually live here. We're looking at an actual basketball team that is doing much better, have proper coaching, and I think I would end it off there. That's my vision of Montserrat in the next 20, 30 years.
I would love to see the Montserrat that you're speaking about. I'll go to Dr. Tiffany Skerrit now, who is a Montserratian in the diaspora working with hopes and dreams of returning home, but also sees the world as her oyster. 10, 15, 20 years, Dr. Skerrit, what does your Montserrat look like?
So my Montserrat in 2040, 2050 looks like our nationals or members of the diaspora using the networks that they have access to better the island. And when I say that, I mean their networks in whichever sphere, whether it's personal or professional, in ways that are intentional, in ways that allow us to innovate, in ways that allow us to capitalize on gaps that exist in other countries to better the island. If that is in healthcare, that's great. If that is in banking and trade, that's great. If that is in agriculture, whichever aspects we have gained skill sets in, as persons from Montserrat who love Montserrat, in whichever ways our skill sets have been developed, that we use those skill sets, that we use the access that we now have to the wider world, to the wider Caribbean, and work together to maximize that impact. And I think that's the goal, that's the dream for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Skerrit. I'm going to go to Mr. Hogan, the Honorable Claude Hogan, if he's still with us. I think he might have left us at this stage as things happen. If he comes back on before we finish, I'll give him a chance. But I really want to say to the three of you who are on and to Mr. Hogan, your insights have been very valuable. And as a Montserratian who is now creeping to the edges or no longer inside what any global definition of youth is, my message to the youth of Montserrat, wherever you live, whether you live in Leicester or you live in Lookout, is that we should see one Montserrat, a Montserrat that is united by what connects us, not what divides us. The ocean doesn't mean you people in the diaspora versus you people in Montserrat. Everybody who's gone to the diaspora is not Einstein. Everybody who's stayed behind, they are not mentally incapable. So I think that's, for me, is one of the immediate things I'd like to see. And as we wrap up, and Mr. Hogan is back with us, the question I was asking of the others is an elevator pitch of about a minute, 10, 15, 20 years. What does Montserrat look like if you held the magic wand?
Well, I already had this plan of having 5 pillars of Montserrat within the next 10 to 15 years. One will be based on the arts, that there will be a functioning arts foundation with private sector ownership of it, and investment in the arts for recording musicians in Montserrat. Building on the Ear Studios experience, I think that is something that we underestimate about Montserrat. And as Tiffany said on the outset, we could start off local. We always had a local cadre of, say, Calypsonians and other artists, right? Eloise Lynch, all sort of people used to sing here, but we still could start back there. So I see that as something even Montserratians overseas will participate in, as something of Montserrat. My second pillar would be a commerce pillar. I think we need to put health and tourism on a strong footing. And if you're going to have tourism, you have to have a proper hospital. So health as part of commerce and plus tourism. Then I have a transport hub. We have to make up our mind about a transport policy for Montserrat. If it's going to be a combination of ferry and air transport, and what is the level of comfort we want to have and the level of risk in terms of flying, because these things matter. It doesn't matter that we all think, oh yeah, 9-seater could bring 18 people over in a day and whatever. That is not what matters. You have to look at what part of the market is your transport going to be carried. Because there are going to be so many more people who will not use your transport if you don't have the right configuration and you optimize that. So you have to have a better transport policy. And I think government will have to create a subvention for that for a few years into the future. Then my fourth pillar would be public services. I want to have a sports authority, and I would like to put MUL and a couple of other companies that do public services in Montserrat on a private sector footing, where Montserratians abroad and Montserratians at home can have shares in it and create investment opportunities for us locally, so that those companies can then go onto the world markets to invest. I rather think it's less risk than to have every Montserratian that make $1 trying to run onto the global trends or onto cryptocurrency. So we can go through our own larger companies if we have ownership in them. And my fifth and final pillar would be the media corporation, which we were thinking about maybe 10, 15 years ago, of joining up Radio Montserrat, Radio Antilles, or the remnants of it. And we had some monies even donated from the Radio Antilles Deutsche Welle Corporation for that. And Montserrat has a communications heart and a communications history and communications ICT, and these things are going to make money into the future. We have to build on these. So those are my 5 pillars, and those are the avenues to which I think that the Montserratians like you, young guys who are eager to invest, can find avenues to more safely invest through, and have the senior citizens participate as board members so that they can keep us governed and that our
Okay,
investments will
it
be
seems
secure.
as though we may have lost connection with Mr. Hogan. Not sure if the others are with me, but I'll use this opportunity to thank each and every one who has been on. Okay, they're back, and Mr. Hogan was just finishing up his point. I think you've pretty much said what you had to say. I want to thank each of you, Dr. Tiffany Skerrit, Nia Golden, Jaish Sadwani, Honorable Claude Hogan, for being part of this discussion and looking forward. We did have to look back, but it's clear that you all have a mindset of looking towards the future. And if I can end with my message to Montserrat and Montserratians and people who love Montserrat, let's not be constrained by our history and what has happened to us, but use that to propel ourselves forward. You do not find people more resilient than Montserratians with what we have gone through. So let's not use that as an anchor to hold us back, but let's look at the opportunities that our resilience have taught us to be able to embrace and move forward strongly and purposefully and put Montserrat on a path to sustainability and prosperity. That's my final message. I would just like to thank the organizers of this panel discussion, the 2021 Alphonsus Arrow Cassell Lecture Series. This was panel discussion number 2, The Future Story of Us. And I'm hoping next year, if the 5 of us sit in one room, we would have been able to advance this discussion. So to my fellow panelists, thank you very much. And to the organizers, thank you very much for having us. I'm Ben Meade. Do have a great day.